The first night wasn't just a rite of passage, it was a dissolution. Lucas left the hospital in the morning with hands marked by scents that seemed to cling to his skin, as if the solvents had left invisible fingerprints. He returned to the small apartment he shared with boxes, bills, and a sink that struggled to drain. He tried to sleep, but the image of the blank face wouldn't let him. Through the gap in the curtains, the city seemed oblivious. Cars, lights, people coming and going, as if a world existed that knew nothing of that heavy silence. On the second night, he walked to the morgue with the routine of someone preparing for an inevitable exam. The night reception greeted him with the same biting air. The supervisor looked at him over a stack of papers and announced, "See, you're still pale, stay sharp, there's not much to ask." Lucas wanted to tell him. He wanted to say there was a man who had vanished into thin air, that the gurney moved on its own, that finger marks appeared like instructions left on the bodies. But every time his throat tightened, he remembered the supervisor's voice. Simple job. So he kept it inside. He blew his fear into his uniform and tightened his gloves as if they were armor against the night. The hours dragged on. There were routines that felt like rituals, identifying the body, registering, cleaning, closing eyes that didn't want to stay shut. However, the morgue had cracks of memory. Sometimes an old radio whispered a song no one had turned on. Sometimes a drawer would jam and release a snap like a clearing throat. Lucas learned to move in silence, almost with reverence. And it was during one of those hours that the sheet on the central gurney stirred. This time there was no announcement. Lucas felt first a chill rise through his body, not the usual cold of the mortuary refrigerators, but an older, indistinct cold, like the end of a dream. He turned slowly and found the same faceless face, half open in an expression that was no expression at all. The body hadn't moved on its own. There had been hands, marks on the shoulders, on the sides of the torso, the signature of someone who knew how to manipulate flesh and cloth without haste. "You came back," a voice said behind him. Lucas jumped, but the voice seemed to come from within the silence. He tried to locate the presence. "Who's there?" He focused on the image of a tall man leaning against the wall. Deep, almost empty eyes, an impeccable uniform. Only then did he notice details he hadn't seen before: small scars on the back of the left hand, an ink stain on the shirt pocket, and a nameless broken badge pinned to his chest. Lucas reached out instinctively, and the silence accepted the contact. "Why are you helping me?" he asked. "Because someone has to," the man replied, as if reciting something long learned. "And because before you, I also needed someone." The words were simple, but they carried weight. They were pieces of a story, the morgue, retold in its nights. Lucas felt he was at the beginning of a lesson. In the following nights, events became a calendar. The man appeared during the most opaque hours, instructing Lucas with surgical precision. When Lucas closed his eyes while cleaning a face, the man whispered about technique, compassion, and routine. There was a strange calm in that tone, a patience that demanded no gratitude. Lucas began to take notes in a pocket notebook, times, procedures, short phrases, as if studying for an exam that would determine his permanence. However, alongside the learning, a restlessness grew. Lucas began to notice small discrepancies. The broken badge the man wore had an old code. The uniform stored in the morgue's locker showed acronyms from decades past. One day, during the shift change, the veteran nurse, Donna Myra, looked at him strangely when he asked for an extra apron. "There's all this pile of old things," she muttered, pushing a box of archives. "Ah, you want to see old papers? Go to the dead files, but be careful what you touch. This place has too much memory." Too much memory. Lucas heard the phrase as a warning. He decided to investigate. In the dead files, among folders worn by time, he found a yellowed package of photographs. There were images of former employees, strangely enduring smiles, office parties, and a black and white photo of a thin man with the same stature as his nightly visitor. In the caption, in nearly faded ink, Mateus, Morgue, 1997. His breath shortened. Beside the photo, a police report described the disappearance of a morgue assistant who had never been located. The last entry in the occurrence log, a typewritten sheet, had an underlined passage. Worker did not return after shift. Area checked. No evidence. Procedure closed. When Lucas returned to the mortuary room that night, the lights seemed lower, as if the hospital itself had decided to save clarity in the face of what was happening there. The man appeared as always and smiled with what could have been tenderness. "Did you find something?" he asked. Lucas showed the photo with trembling hands. The man didn't seem surprised. His eyes, hard as polished metal, rested on the photograph. "Mateus," he said, his voice sounding as if he were repeating a name that once belonged to someone else. "There was always a Mateus, and one before Mateus, and another before that. We are many of the same trade." "What are you?" Lucas asked. The question hung between the cold lights like an echo. The man raised his hand and, instead of answering, placed it on Lucas's chest, as if transferring a weight. Lucas felt something fragile and heavy at the same time. Memories that weren't his, images of people he had never met, of nights when someone had closed eyes and left them open, of hands that guided sheets like someone embroidering invisible information. "You will learn to carry it," the man said. "It's not something you choose. It's something you accept or you repeat. And sometimes it repeats in us." Lucas tried to step back, but it was as if a tide had begun to pull him into the morgue. He could leave, he could report it, he could run away, but he realized the ordinary world was no longer so simple. Outside of there, the air seemed heavy with questions that people's faces didn't know how to answer. His daytime colleagues would look at him and say, "You look tired." No one asked what it was like to grow tired of seeing the invisible. Over the weeks, Lucas changed, not by will, but by the weight deposited upon him. The pocket notebook now held meticulous instructions, and his hands, once trembling, became firm. He learned to lift an arm without startling, to close a mouth without offending, to fold a sheet like someone closing a book, and the more he understood the trade, the more the man seemed to dissolve. Each lesson assimilated took away a fragment of that presence that had sustained him. There were nights when Lucas wanted to call him, wanted to explain that he knew now, that he didn't need him anymore, but the presence had become a blade. For everything he learned, the man receded until he became a mere shadow against the metal. On that final night, when Lucas covered the last body and placed the tag with professional calm, the morgue was quieter than ever. The man appeared one last time, standing near the metal table, watching. For the first time, Lucas realized that the faceless face of the body and the face of the man were not just similar. They were the same face, fragmented into different reflections. The man smiled, and there was no longer a shadow to hide his face. It was the blank face of the corpses, the design of someone who had learned to exist between the living and the dead. "Take it easy," he said. "Sometimes the work is simple, sometimes it's not. Remember, there has to be someone to teach." Lucas felt in that moment a door closing inside him. It wasn't tragedy or redemption. It was just the fulfillment of a function as old as the cold of the chambers. The man receded into the shadows and, with a soft gesture, touched the side of the gurney as if offering a blessing. His fingers left a damp mark, the same finger mark he had seen so many times. When the lights flickered and stabilized, Lucas was alone, and looking at his face in the polished metal, for a second he saw the image of another, a man from years ago, and then nothing, just his own gaze, firmer, more burdened. The next morning, when he handed the notebook to the supervisor, Lucas felt light and heavy at the same time. The supervisor didn't ask too much. "You did a good job," he said simply. "Go get some rest." Lucas left. The city received him with the same indifference. He filled the silence with small human habits: bread and butter, a crowded bus, neighbors complaining about a faucet, and learned to hide the morgue behind him like a garment he wore only at night. But there were nights when his hands would fall asleep with memories of touch, when the sheet seemed to ask to be adjusted, or when, in the reflection of a spoon, Lucas believed he saw for a second someone standing behind him without a shadow to protect their face. He knew now that there was a place between the world of the living and the rest of the bodies. A trade passed from one to another like a secret that couldn't die. And if one day someone new appeared, in the same hurry to stay alive, Lucas would know what to say. "Relax. The first night is always the worst. I'll help you." Because in the morgue, teaching and being taught was what kept the place in order, and the touches on icy skin would continue to write instructions that only a few could hear.